The auditorium smelled like floor wax and cut flowers, and a man I had never met put his hand flat against my back and began to walk me toward the door. He did it gently, the way you steer someone who has wandered into the wrong room at a wedding. His palm was warm through my coat. He leaned close enough that I could smell coffee and expensive aftershave, and he said it in the low, patient voice of a person who believes he is being kind. "This is the stage party's row," he said. "Catering uses the side door." I had flown most of the night. My uniform was zipped into a garment bag I had left folded over a chair against the back wall because the connecting flight had been delayed 2 hours on a tarmac in the dark and there had been no time to change. So I was standing in a charcoal travel coat over slacks, my hair coming loose at the temple, a paper cup of bad airport coffee still in my hand. And to this man, I was exactly what I looked like, a tired woman who did not belong near the front. I should tell you that this was not the first time something like this had happened to me, only the most public. A woman in her 40s who carries herself quietly, who does not announce herself, who walks into military spaces without the armor of a visible rank, gets sorted by other people 100 times a year. I had been mistaken for a spouse, for a contractor, for administrative staff, for a reporter, for someone's mother. I had stopped correcting people years before, partly because it was easier, and partly, if I am honest, because being underestimated had become a kind of camouflage I had grown comfortable inside. You cannot be disappointed by someone who expects nothing of you. You cannot fail in front of a person who has already decided you are no one. There is a terrible safety in being overlooked, and I had been living inside that safety for so long that I had mistaken it for peace. A few of the officers in the nearest seats heard him. One of them laughed, just a soft exhale through the nose, the kind of laugh that costs nothing and means everything. The man with his hand on my back heard it too, and it encouraged him. He pressed a little firmer. "Quietly, please," he said. "We're about to begin." I had learned a very long time ago, in a place much louder than that room, that the loudest thing I could do was nothing, so I let him walk me 3 steps toward the aisle. 3 steps, past a row of dress blues, past the single empty chair at the front with a small white card propped on the seat, past 200 people who had come to watch a ceremony and were now, some of them, watching a small piece of theater they did not understand. I want to tell you that I was calm. The truth is plainer than that. I was practiced. There is a difference, and I have spent my whole life on the wrong side of it. At the podium, a major general had opened a leather folder and begun to read. He had a flat, careful voice, the voice of a man who reads orders aloud for a living and has learned not to add anything to them. He read the date, he read the authority, and then he read the name on the orders, and his voice changed, the way a voice changes when a person says out loud a thing he has waited a long time to say. He stopped. He looked up from the folder, he looked at the man whose hand was still on my arm, and he looked at me, and the room felt the temperature drop before anyone understood why. "Son," the general said, "do you know who you are walking out of this room?" The man's hand did not come off my arm right away. That is the part I remember most clearly. There was a full second, maybe 2, where his fingers stayed exactly where they were, because his brain had heard the general's voice, but had not yet agreed to believe it. I have seen that look before, on younger faces, in worse places. It is the look of a person whose map of the world has just stopped matching the ground. I did not move. People think composure is a kind of calm, something that happens to you, like weather. It is not. It is a decision made so many times that it stops feeling like a decision and starts feeling like a spine. You stand still, you keep your face level, you let the silence do the work that anger wants to do, because anger spends itself in one bright second, and silence can hold a room for as long as you need it to. So I stood there in my travel coat with my cold coffee, and I let them all look at me. You should understand who they thought they were looking at, because the gap between that and the truth is the whole of this story. They saw a woman in her early 40s who had clearly had a bad night, who had walked into the wrong part of a formal event, who had been corrected by a polished young officer doing his job. That is a small thing. It happens at ceremonies. It would have been forgotten by lunch. What none of them could see, what the orders in the general's hand had just begun to say out loud, was that the ceremony was mine. The empty chair at the front, the one with the white card, had my name on it. The eagles in the small velvet box on the table beside the podium were going onto my shoulders. 200 officers had put on their dress uniforms and given up a Friday morning to watch me become a colonel in the United States Army. And not one of them had known my face when I walked through the door because I had spent 14 years making very sure that my face was not worth knowing. That had not started as humility. I want to be honest about that. It had started as survival, and somewhere along the way it had hardened into a habit, and somewhere after that it had become a kind of hiding I no longer noticed I was doing. The way you stop hearing a sound you have lived next to for years. A woman was moving up the aisle toward me now, fast, in dress blues, her face tight with the particular fury of a person watching a friend be wronged. Delphine Cardoza had been my sponsor for this ceremony and my friend for 19 years, since we were lieutenants who did not yet know what the Army would ask of us. She reached my side and put her hand on my shoulder, and her hand was the opposite of the one that had been on my back. It said, "I am with you." It did not say, "Let me move you." "Meredith," she said, low and furious. "They were supposed to seat you up front an hour ago. I told them. I told 3 different people." "It's all right," I said. It was not all right, but I had been saying that sentence for 14 years, and it came out of me as smooth and worn as a stone in a river. Delphine kept her hand where it was. She had earned the right to it over 19 years. We had been second lieutenants together at a school in the middle of nowhere, 2 women in a class that did not quite know what to do with us, and we had made a private agreement back then, never written down, that whatever the Army did to one of us, the other would be in the room for it. She had kept that agreement better than I had. She had made colonel 2 years ahead of me, and then a year after that she had been selected for a command that I had quietly been passed over for. And she had come to me, the night the list came out. Not to gloat, never that, but to be angry on my behalf in a way I would not let myself be angry. She knew the shape of my career better than anyone alive. She knew that for 14 years I had been handed the assignments nobody wanted, the broken units and the impossible timelines and the jobs that could only fail or go unnoticed, and that I had taken every one of them without complaint because some part of me believed that was what I was for now. The careful one. The safe pair of hands that would never again be trusted with a moment that mattered and would therefore never again get a boy killed. I had built a whole career out of being the person you give the thing that cannot blow up in your face. And the terrible joke of it, standing in that auditorium, was that I was good at it. I had become genuinely, unmistakably good at being small. To explain why I stood so still, I have to take you somewhere I do not like to go. In the autumn of 2012, I was a captain, 29 years old, commanding a company at a small combat outpost in a valley in eastern Afghanistan that I will not name. Because the name is on a wall now, and it deserves better than to be a setting in a story. We had been there long enough to know the ground and not long enough to trust it. There was a partner force position about 400 meters to our east, across a dry riverbed, manned by Allied troops we had trained, with a handful of local families living in the compounds nearby because being near the soldiers felt safer than being far from them. It was not safer. Nothing there was safer. But people believe what they need to believe, and I have never been able to blame them for it. I had walked that riverbed 100 times in daylight. I knew where it narrowed and where it opened, where the banks were low enough to cross, and where they rose into crumbling shelves of dried mud. I knew which compounds had children in them because the children came out to watch us when we patrolled, and one of them, a boy of maybe 7, used to salute me. A wobbling, serious, entirely incorrect salute. And I used to return it with all the gravity I could manage because it seemed to matter to him and it cost me nothing. I have thought about that boy many times. I do not know if he was in the compound that was cut off. I have never let myself find out. There are some accountings I have not been brave enough to ask for, and that is one of them. The attack came before dawn. In that gray hour, the briefings always call 0500, and the body always calls the middle of the night. It was not harassment. It was a real assault, coordinated, heavy, the kind we had been told for months would not happen there. The partner position took the worst of it in the first 10 minutes. By the time I had my company up and the radios alive, that position was being overrun, and a squad of my own soldiers, who had been there as advisors, plus the Allied troops, plus the families in the nearest compound, were cut off on the wrong side of the riverbed, with the enemy between them and us. I want to be careful here, because the easy version of this story makes me into something I'm not. I was not brave in the way that word usually means. I was terrified the entire time. My hands shook so badly on the map that I had to flatten them against it to read it. What I had, the only thing I had, was that I could see the people who were about to be left, and the order coming over the radio could not. The order was to consolidate, to pull my forces back to the outpost proper, to defensible ground, to hold what could be held, and wait for the quick reaction force and the aircraft that were, the radio promised, on the way. On a map, in a headquarters, it was the correct order. It was the order I would have written if I had been the one looking at the map instead of the ground. I have never pretended otherwise. The man who gave it was not a coward, and he was not a fool. But I was not looking at a map. I was looking at the riverbed, and I knew, the way you know a thing in your body before your mind catches up, that if I pulled everyone back to the wire, the 23 people cut off across that riverbed would be dead, or taken before the aircraft arrived. The math was not complicated. It was just terrible. So I did the thing that broke my life in half. I acknowledged the order, and then I did not obey it. I held a forward strongpoint, a low stone building, and a collapsed wall at the near edge of the riverbed, with a small team, and I put everything I had into keeping a path open long enough for the cut-off element to break out and cross. There was a soldier on the flank of that strongpoint named Asa Quill. He was 19 years old. He was from a small town you have never heard of, and he had a way of talking that made the other soldiers laugh even when there was nothing to laugh about, which is a rarer and more valuable thing in a hard place than any medal the army gives out. The flank was the worst position. It was the one that had to hold for the breakout to work, and it was the one most exposed, and Quill took it without being told to, which is the only kind of taking that counts. He got himself behind the collapsed wall with a machine gun and a young soldier's certainty that he was going to be fine, and he held the corner while the cut-off element came across the riverbed in 2s and 3s, soldiers and allied troops, and a mother with a child on her hip, and an old man who could barely run. I was 12 feet from him. I want you to understand that, because for 14 years I have needed someone to understand it. I was close enough to hear him. At one point he turned his head and grinned at me, this 19-year-old grin, and he said, "Go, ma'am, I've got the corner, I've got it." I did not go. I stayed and I worked the radio and I pulled people the last few yards into cover, and the line held, and 23 people crossed that riverbed who would not have crossed it if I had obeyed the order. 23 people went home. Some of them have children now. One of them, a sergeant at the time, is a command sergeant major today, and you will meet him again before this is over. He was a sergeant then, 27 years old, and he ran that riverbed more times than I could count, going back into the open again and again to bring people across. A wounded Allied soldier over his shoulders one trip, the mother and her child the next, the old man the trip after that. I gave him no orders to do any of it. He simply saw what needed doing and did it, the way the best soldiers always do. And at some point in that gray hour, I understood that I was not commanding a breakout so much as witnessing a small number of people decide, all at once and without discussion, that none of them were going to leave anyone behind. You do not forget the people you stood next to on a morning like that. You cannot. They become a part of how you measure everyone you meet for the rest of your life. Asa Quill did not cross. The corner he was holding came apart in the last 2 minutes, when the breakout was all but finished, when there were only a handful of us left to bring across, and he stayed on the gun those last 2 minutes because staying on the gun was the only thing keeping the rest of us alive. And he was killed there, at his corner, 19 years old, with that grin not yet gone from my memory. We carried him out. I want you to know that we did not leave him. Whatever else they said about me afterward, in the rooms with the fluorescent lights and the careful questions, no one ever said I left him, because I did not. 23 people walked out of that valley because of a decision I made. For 14 years, I was only able to count the one who did not. The aircraft came. The quick reaction force came. By full light it was over, in the way these things are ever over, which is to say the shooting stopped and the rest of it began. The rest of it was paperwork. I had disobeyed a direct order, and a soldier under my command was dead, and those two facts sat next to each other in every report like a question that already knew the answer it wanted. The battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel named Bram Forsyth, was the man who had given the consolidation order. He was a competent officer and a careful one, and I think now, with the distance of years, that he was also a frightened one, because a soldier had died on a night he was responsible for. And the cleanest place to put that weight was on the captain who had not done what she was told. He opened a formal investigation. There is a number for it, a regulation, and I will not bore you with the number, but you should know what it is. It is the army turning its full and patient attention onto a single decision you made in the dark, and asking, over weeks and months in writing, whether you should have made it. It is necessary. I have served on the other side of those investigations since, and I know they are necessary. That did not make it feel like anything other than a slow, bloodless trial. I sat in those rooms, and I answered the questions, and I did not defend myself the way a person is supposed to want to. I told them what I saw and what I decided, and why, in a flat voice. The same flat voice you would have heard from me at the podium 14 years later. I did not weep, and I did not rage, and I did not beg. And I have wondered since whether that hurt me, whether a louder woman would have been believed faster. Quiet reads as guilt to some people. Composure reads as coldness. I did not know how to be any other way. I still do not. The investigation cleared me. It took the better part of a year, and in the end, it found that my decision, while contrary to orders, had been sound under the circumstances, and that the loss of Specialist Isa Quill, while grievous, was not the result of negligence. They gave me the Silver Star for it. There was a small ceremony in a small room, the kind with folding chairs, and someone read a citation, and someone pinned a medal, and I went home and put it in a drawer and did not take it out again. Because here's the thing the investigation could clear and the medal could not fix. Somewhere in that year, a word had been written down about me in a paragraph in an early report before the finding, when the question still wanted its easy answer. The word was reckless. And a word like that, once it is written about an officer, does not stay in the file where it was written. It travels. It gets into the air around your name. People who have never met you and never read the file somehow know that there was a thing, a valley, a dead soldier, a captain who disobeyed an order. Reckless. It followed me from assignment to assignment for 14 years. A quiet sound under everything. And the worst part was that I came to agree with it. Not with the facts, with the verdict on me as a person. I decided, without ever deciding it out loud, that I was a woman who had to be very careful from then on, very small, very quiet, because I had been trusted with a terrible moment once, and a boy had died. And the only way to make sure that never happened again was to make sure I was never quite trusted with anything again. That is the woman who stood in the auditorium in a travel coat and let a stranger walk her toward the door. I did not let him, because I was weak. I let him because for 14 years I had been practicing being exactly the kind of person you can walk toward a door. Now you understand the room better than the room understood itself. The general at the podium was named Augustus Rourke. He was a major general now, 2 stars, 54 years old, with the kind of weathered face that the army puts on its better officers if it keeps them long enough. In the autumn of 2012, he had been a lieutenant colonel, and he had been the commander of the larger task force whose ground my strong point had been protecting. The path I kept open across that riverbed had not only saved the 23 people who were cut off, it had bought time and space for a much larger force, Rourke's force, that would otherwise have been fixed and flanked in the gray light. He had always known that. He had said so, quietly, in the year of the investigation, in a written statement that I did not learn about until much later, in which he had used the word decisive, where someone else had used the word reckless. He had asked, when my name came up for colonel, to be the one to preside. I had not known that either. I had assumed the presiding officer was assigned, the way these things usually are. I learned afterward that he had requested it specifically, had moved his schedule to make it happen because he had spent 14 years waiting for a chance to read my name out loud in a room full of people and have it mean what it was supposed to mean. He closed the folder. He did it slowly with both hands, the way you close something that matters. And then he did the thing that turned a small, awkward moment into the moment that I will carry for the rest of my life. He did not let the orders speak for themselves. He stepped off the dais, down to the floor where the rest of us stood, and he told the room the part the orders leave out. By order of the Secretary of the Army, he had read a moment before, and effective this date, the following officers promoted to the grade of colonel, Meredith Ann Vaughn. And then, with the folder closed, looking not at me, but at the 200 people who had laughed or not laughed, he said, 14 years ago, this officer disobeyed an order I would have given myself. And because she disobeyed it, I am standing here. So are 23 other people. So very likely are a number of you who served in that task force and never knew how close that morning came to going the other way. He let that sit. He was a man who understood the weight of a silence and was not afraid to spend it. I watched it move through the room in rows, the way wind moves through a field, the officers who had served in that task force going very still as they did the arithmetic, as they realized that the gray morning they half remembered, the one that had somehow not become a catastrophe, had not stayed a half memory by accident. Somebody had kept a path open. They had simply never known her name. Now they did. It was written on the orders in the general's hand, and it had been written the whole time on a wall in a valley, under the name of a boy who held a corner. The man with his hand on my arm took his hand off my arm. He did it the way you take your hand off a stove. Not because anyone told him to, because the floor had tilted under him, and a person reaches for balance before he knows why he is falling. I have been in firefights that were quieter than that room. It is a strange thing to be wanted by a crowd that did not want you 90 seconds ago. I had spent 14 years inside the contempt, or what I had decided was contempt, the quiet sound under my name. And I had built a whole self to live in it, careful and small and silent. I had no self built for the other thing. When 200 faces turned toward me with sudden warmth, with the specific guilty warmth of people who have just realized they were on the wrong side of a moment, I did not feel vindicated. I felt skinned. For 14 years, I had wanted exactly one thing. I had wanted someone, anyone, to say it out loud in front of people, so that I would not have to carry the verdict alone anymore. I had built that wish into a kind of religion, and now it was happening, the exact thing I had wished for. And I understood in real time that I had wished for the wrong thing, or had wished for it in the wrong way, because being right in front of a crowd is its own kind of loneliness. The crowd cannot carry it with you. They can only watch you hold it. The weight does not get smaller because more people can see it. I felt the old reflex come up, the one that had kept me alive in that bloodless trial 14 years before. Stand still, keep your face level, let the silence work. Give them nothing to feel sorry for, because the moment they feel sorry for you, you become the dead boy's shadow instead of his commander, and you owe him better than to be his shadow. Near the front, the young captain who had half risen when Lawson first put his hand on me was fully on his feet now, and he was looking at me with something I did not have a name for in the moment, and have since decided was a kind of apology offered on behalf of a room. He had been the only one who moved in those first seconds, the only one who sensed that something was wrong before he could possibly have known what. I have thought about him too. There is always one. In the worst rooms of my life, there has always been one person who stands up a half second before it is safe to. And they are usually junior, and they are usually the reason I still believe the institution is worth the price it asks. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. It was all I had to give right then. I hope he understood it. I hope, wherever he is now, that he is still the kind of officer who stands up early. Rourke was looking at me now. He gestured, an open hand toward the front, toward the dais, toward the empty chair with my name on it and the velvet box with the eagles in it. "Colonel Vaughn," he said, "come up here. This is yours." Delphine's hand was still on my shoulder. She leaned in and said, just for me, "You don't have to say anything you don't mean. Just get to the front. The rest is yours. We'll figure out the words after." I made myself move. The walk from the back of that auditorium to the dais was about 30 meters. I have walked 30 meters across worse ground. I do not think I have ever walked 30 meters that cost me more. Every step I passed a face, and every face had rearranged itself. And the rearranging was the thing I could hardly stand, because it meant the contempt had never been as solid as I had built my life around. It had been thin. It had been a habit of theirs the way smallness had been a habit of mine. A few words from a general had dissolved it like sugar in water, and I had spent 14 years treating it as bedrock. I reached the foot of the dais. Rourke held the orders in his hand. The room waited. And I understood that I was about to decide in front of all of them what kind of moment this was going to be. There are two easy versions, and I want to tell you about both, because I considered both, standing there in the space of about 3 seconds. The first easy version was the one where I let the room have the aide. His name, I would learn, was Spencer Lawson. He was a major, 37 years old, the general's aide de camp, the officer who runs the schedule and the seating and the protocol, and he was good at it. Polished and quick and ambitious in the particular way of officers who have decided that the path up runs through being useful to powerful men. He had made a contemptuous assumption about a tired woman in a coat, and he had been publicly, catastrophically wrong. And the room was primed now to turn on him the way rooms do. Hungry to be on the right side of a thing they had almost been on the wrong side of. All I had to do was say one sentence. One cool, accurate sentence about a man who lays hands on people he has decided are beneath him, and Major Spencer Lawson's career would have ended at that podium, in front of the general he worked for and every officer who would ever sit on a board judging him. I had the sentence ready. I want to be honest about that too. I had carried a version of that sentence for 14 years, the sentence I had never gotten to say to the people who had branded me, and here was a man who had handed me the chance to finally say it to someone. It would have felt, for about a day, like justice. The second easy version was the victory lap, the vindication. To stand at that podium and let 14 years of being made small come out as something sharp and triumphant, to make the room understand exactly how wrong they had all been, to take the warmth they were offering and turn it into a monument to my own endurance. They would have loved it. There's nothing a crowd loves more than watching someone they wronged be magnificent about it. I put both of them down. I did not put them down because I am a better person than that. I put them down because of a thing Asa Quill had taught me without meaning to. At his corner, 12 feet away, 19 years old. He had held that corner not to be magnificent and not to settle a score. He had held it because there were people behind him who needed the path open, and his own moment did not matter next to that. He had spent his last 2 minutes on something larger than himself. And I had spent 14 years making my survival into something so small and so guilty that I had insulted his with it. If I stood at that podium and made the morning about my grievance or my vindication, I would be doing with his death exactly what I had always done, making it about me. I would not do that one more time. Before I could speak, there was movement in the middle of the room. A command sergeant major was getting to his feet. He was a big man, 41 years old now, with gray at his temples that had not been there in the valley, and I knew him before he said a word, the way you always know the people you carried something heavy with. Otis Devlin had been a sergeant at that strong point. He had been one of the ones moving the wounded across the riverbed while Quill held the corner. He had walked out of that valley because the path stayed open. He stood, and he came to attention, and he spoke loud enough for the whole hall, in the voice senior enlisted soldiers keep for the moments that matter. I walked out of that strong point, ma'am, Otis Devlin said. So did my squad. I have been waiting 14 years to stand up in a room and say so. He did not sit back down. He stood at attention in the middle of that auditorium, a command sergeant major with gray at his temples, and one by one, around the room, other people began to stand. Not on any command. There was no command. They stood the way people stand when sitting has become impossible, when staying in your chair would mean something you are not willing to mean. I do not know how many of them had been in that task force. Some certainly. Most had not. It did not seem to matter. Otis Devlin had told them what the room was for, and the room was answering him, and I stood at the foot of that dais and watched a thing happen that I had stopped believing would ever happen, which was that the silence I had carried alone for 14 years was being shared out, at last, across 200 pairs of shoulders, whether I had asked for it or not. I took the podium. I am not going to pretend I remember every word I said, because I do not, the way you do not remember every word of the most important conversations of your life. Only the shape of them and the few sentences that turned out to matter. But I remember the shape, and I remember what I decided to do with that room, and I will give it to you as honestly as I can. I did not defend myself. There was nothing left to defend. The orders had been read, the general had spoken, the command sergeant major was on his feet. The defense had made itself, and adding to it would only have been the victory lap, wearing a humble face. I did not mention the man who had walked me toward the door. Not one word. I want you to notice that, not because it makes me admirable, but because silence was the sharper tool, and I knew it. To name him would have been to make him important. To leave him unnamed, standing at the side of the room with the whole hall now knowing what he had done, was a heavier thing than any sentence I could have aimed at him. I did not do it to spare him. I did it because he was not what the morning was about, and I was finished letting small men set the subject. What I did was tell them about the corner. I told them about a valley in the autumn of 2012. I told them about an order that was correct on a map and wrong on the ground, and about a riverbed, and about 23 people who needed a path kept open. I told it plainly without making myself the hero of it, because I was not the hero of it. And then I told them about a 19-year-old named Aloud, who took the worst position on the line without being told to, and who turned and grinned at me and said he had the corner, and who held that corner with his life so that 23 other people could cross. The orders you just heard, read aloud, have my name on them, I said. I am proud of them. I worked for them for 21 years, but I need you to understand something because I have spent 14 years failing to say it. The valley does not have my name on it. The valley belongs to Aloud. I came home. He did not. Every promotion I have ever received, including this one, I have received on time that he bought. I told them one more thing because it was the truest thing I knew and because the room had earned it. I told them that the word that had followed me for 14 years, the quiet word under my name, had very nearly worked. It had very nearly convinced me. I told them that the most dangerous thing that can happen to a soldier is not an investigation or a bad report or a career that stalls. It is the slow, patient process of coming to agree with the lowest thing ever said about you until you build your whole life around making sure you can never be accused of it again. Until you are so busy being safe that you forget you were once the kind of person who would hold a strong point against an order because there were people who needed the path kept open. I told them that I had spent 14 years becoming careful, and that I was standing in front of them to say that I was finished being careful in that particular way, the way that is really just fear wearing the uniform of humility. I asked the room to do one thing for me. I asked them to say his name. It is not a normal thing to ask of 200 officers in dress uniforms. But I asked it because for 14 years his name had lived almost entirely inside me, in a drawer next to a medal, in a silence I had told myself was respect and had finally understood was just grief with nowhere to go. I said his name, Aloud, and I asked them to say it back. And they did. 200 people said the name of a 19-year-old who had been dead for 14 years, in a room he never saw, and the sound of it went into the air and stayed there. Something moved in my chest that had not moved in 14 years. I do not have a better word for it than that. A weight that I had carried so long I had stopped feeling it as weight, the way you stop feeling your own pulse, shifted, just slightly, just enough to let me breathe under it. General Rourke came up beside me with the small velvet box. He took out the eagles, the silver eagles of a colonel, and he pinned them to my shoulders, one and then the other, while the room stood. They were heavier than I expected. Rank always is. And I stood there with a dead boy's name still hanging in the air and silver on my shoulders, and I let myself, for one moment, be both things at once. The one who came home, the one who could not bring him. The aftermath was its own country, and I had to learn to live in it quickly. The first thing that happened before the room had even fully emptied was that the machinery began to move against Spencer Lawson. I want to be fair about this. He had laid hands on a senior officer in front of 200 witnesses. He had done it on an assumption that said something ugly about how he saw people he had decided did not matter. The command had every right and arguably every obligation to come down on him, and it began to, fast. A colonel I did not know found me in the corridor afterward and told me, with the satisfied gravity of a man delivering good news, that Major Lawson's career was, in his words, finished, and that they would need a brief statement from me to make it formal. I told him no. He did not understand at first. He thought I was being gracious or shocked, or that I had not understood the offer. He explained it again, more slowly, the way Lawson had explained the side door to me. I let him finish. And then I told him the truth, which was that I would not buy my recognition with a man's ruin, not even that man's, not even on that morning. Correct him hard, I said. Hold him to the standard. He laid hands on someone he decided was beneath him, and he needs to understand all the way down what that means, and what it nearly cost him, and there should be a real consequence, on paper, in proportion. But you will not end a man's whole career today, so that my mourning can feel finished. I have spent 14 years being the thing a frightened institution needed to blame. I am not going to hand that role to someone else on the day I finally put it down. I do not know if the colonel understood me. I do not think it matters whether he did. Lawson received a formal consequence, a real one, the kind that follows an officer and shapes the rest of his service, but not the kind that ends it. I am told he is still in, doing his job, presumably more carefully now about whose back he puts his hand on. I thought a great deal in the weeks afterward about why I had protected him, because protect is the honest word for it, even if mercy is the prettier one. It was not kindness. I did not feel kind toward Spencer Lawson, and I do not now. It was something colder and I think more useful than kindness. I had been on the receiving end of an institution that needed someone to be the problem, and I knew exactly what it does to a person to be made into the lesson a frightened organization teaches itself. I was not going to do that to anyone, not even to a man who had earned a smaller version of it, because the moment I did, I would have become the thing that had nearly destroyed me. The valley had taught me that you do not keep a path open by deciding who deserves to be left behind. You keep it open for everyone on the wrong side of the riverbed, including the ones you do not like, including the ones who put their hand on your back and called you catering. That is either the whole point or there is no point. We have crossed paths exactly once since, in a corridor at a different headquarters. He came to attention and saluted me correctly with no warmth and no resentment, and I returned it exactly the same way, and we both kept walking. That is the whole of our relationship and the whole of what it should be. Not friendship, not a feud. The correct, permanent distance of two people who met on the worst morning of one of their careers and the best of the others. The second thing that happened took longer to arrive. About 3 weeks after the ceremony, a letter reached me. It was from Bram Forsyth. He was retired now. He had made colonel and stopped there. He had never made general, and I will not pretend I do not know why. And I will not pretend there is not a small, low part of me that has made its peace with the symmetry of it. The valley followed him too in its way. The man who gives an order that a subordinate has to disobey to save lives does not come out of that clean, even when the subordinate is the one who is investigated. The letter was short. He was not a sentimental man, and he did not try to become one on the page. He did not ask for forgiveness, which I respected, because forgiveness was not his to ask for, and we both knew it. What he wrote was closer to an accounting. I wrote the word that followed you, the letter said. It is in an early report, before the finding, and I knew when I wrote it that it was the easy word and not the true one. I have had 14 years to learn how wrong it was. I do not expect this to matter to you now, and it should not. But it is on the record that I wrote it, and now it is on the record that I take it back. I read it twice. I did not write back, and I do not feel I owe an explanation for that. Some things do not need a reply. The man had carried his version of the valley for 14 years, just as I had carried mine, and he had finally set down his piece of it. And that was between him and the part of himself that had written the word. It did not require my participation. There was no reconciliation in it, and there did not need to be. There was only a thing, long held, finally set down, and the quiet that comes after. I had spent a great many of those 14 years as imagining what I would say to Bram Forsyth if I ever got the chance. I had a speech for him, too, the way I had a speech for the people who branded me, the way I had the sentence ready for Lawson. It is remarkable how many speeches you can write and never give. When the letter finally came, I discovered that I did not want to give any of them. The speeches had been for a younger version of me, a captain still standing in a room with fluorescent lights, still certain that if she could just explain it correctly, one more time the verdict would change and the weight would lift. The weight does not lift because you win the argument. I know that now. It lifts when you decide to stop having the argument. It lifts at a kitchen table, 4 hours away, when a mother tells you to set her son down. That is the truth about reckonings that no one tells you. The movies end them in the room, with the music swelling and the wrongdoer destroyed and the wronged one lifted up. Real ones end in corridors and in short letters and in the absence of music. They end with a salute returned exactly, with a letter unanswered, with a word taken back 14 years too late and accepted anyway. Not because the lateness stops mattering, but because you are tired of carrying the weight of being owed. That night I sat alone in a hotel room with the eagles on the table in front of me. I had taken them off because they were heavy and because I wanted to look at them instead of wear them. They sat on the laminate next to a paper cup of bad coffee, the same kind I had been holding when Lawson decided I did not belong. And I looked at them for a long time. 2 silver birds, 21 years, a valley, a drawer with a medal in it that I had not opened in 14 years, and that I realized, sitting there, I would open when I got home, because I was done keeping it in the dark. I had told myself, for all those years, that the silence was for Asa, that keeping his name private, keeping the medal in the drawer, keeping myself small, was a way of honoring him, of not making his death into my advancement. It had felt like respect. It had felt like the least I could do. Sitting in that hotel room with silver on the table, I finally understood that it had not been for him at all. It had been for me. The silence had been a place I could go to stay in the valley with him, because leaving the valley felt like leaving him in it alone. As long as I kept myself small and guilty and quiet, I never fully came home, and as long as I never fully came home, neither did he. And we could stay there together, the captain and the boy at the corner, in the gray light, forever. That had not been honor. It had been a refusal to let either of us go. I picked up the eagles and turned them over in my hands. Somewhere across the country, in a drawer I had not opened in 14 years, there was a silver star in a flat blue box and a folded citation that I had read exactly once, in the small room with the folding chairs, and never again. I had treated that medal the way you treat something radioactive, as though looking at it too directly would burn me, as though wearing it would be a theft from a 19-year-old who could not wear anything anymore. Sitting there with 2 silver birds on a hotel table, I understood that I had it exactly backward. The theft was not in wearing it. The theft was in hiding it, in pretending the valley had not happened, in keeping Asa Quill's last 2 minutes locked in the dark with my own guilt for company. He had not died so that I could disappear. No one ever holds a corner so that the people who cross can spend the rest of their lives apologizing for crossing. There was a knock at the door. It was Delphine, of course, because it is always Delphine, with 2 cups of coffee that were somehow worse than the airport coffee, and a look on her face that said she was not going to let me sit alone with 2 silver birds and a drawer full of old grief. She sat down across from me, and she did not say anything wise for a while, which is the truest kind of friendship. And then she said the thing that I have thought about every day since. "You kept that door shut so long," she said, "that you forgot you were the one holding it closed. Nobody's been pushing on it for years, Meredith. The valley let go of you a long time ago. You're the one who won't walk out. You're allowed to walk out. You've been allowed the whole time." I did not argue with her. I have argued with Delphine Cardoza for 19 years, and I have learned which arguments I am going to lose. I sat with the eagles and the bad coffee and my oldest friend, and I made a decision, the way I had made a decision in a valley once, in the dark, before my mind had fully agreed to it. In the morning, I was going to drive to a town I had been avoiding for 14 years. Asa Quill's mother lived 4 hours away, in the small town he had come from, in a house with a porch and a yard that had gone a little wild at the edges, the way yards do, when the person who used to fight the wildness is gone and the person left behind has bigger things to fight. Her name was Lorna. I had written to her once 14 years before, a careful letter that said true things, and somehow managed to say nothing. The kind of letter you write when you are 29 and terrified and have been told by lawyers and public affairs officers what you may and may not say. I had never gone. I had told myself for 14 years that she would not want to see the officer who had been in command when her son died. I understand now that this was one more thing I told myself to stay in the valley. She opened the door before I finished knocking. She had seen me from the window. A woman in a dress uniform with silver on her shoulders standing on her porch. And she knew, the way mothers know, who I had to be. She made coffee. It was, I want you to know, the best coffee I had had in days, in years, in a long time, because it was made by a woman who had been making coffee for soldiers and the families of soldiers her whole life, and who put something into it that the machines at the airports cannot. We sat at her kitchen table. There were photographs of him everywhere, the way there are in those houses, frozen at 19 forever while everyone around him kept aging. The grin, The same grin. I had to look away from it for a moment, and she let me, and she did not rush me, because she had spent 14 years learning to wait for people to be able to speak. I always knew he did something, she said finally. They told me he was a hero. They gave me a flag, but nobody would tell me what he did. 14 years, Colonel, and not one person would sit at this table and tell me what my boy actually did. Tell me now. All of it. I have waited a very long time. So I told her. I told her about the valley and the gray light and the order that was wrong on the ground. I told her about the riverbed and the 23 people who needed a path kept open. And I told her about the corner and about how her son took the worst position on the line without being told to, because that was the kind of soldier he was, and I suspected the kind of person she had raised. I told her how he turned and grinned at me and said he had the corner. I told her that he held it with his life, so that a mother with a child on her hip and an old man who could barely run and 21 others could cross a riverbed and go home. I told her that I was 12 feet away. I told her that we did not leave him, that we carried him out, that whatever else anyone ever said, no one ever said we left him, because we did not. She asked me questions. Real ones. The questions a mother has saved up for 14 years and never been allowed to ask. Whether he had been afraid, whether he had been in pain, whether he had said anything. I answered all of them, and I answered them truthfully, which I could only do because I had finally decided that the truth was a thing I owed her more than I owed my own comfort. I told her he had not seemed afraid, and that this was not a kindness I was inventing for her, that it was simply true, that some people are visited by a kind of terrible calm in the worst moments, and her son had been one of them. I told her that I did not believe he had been in pain for long, and I told her the last thing he said, which he had said to me 12 feet away, with that grin. Go, ma'am, I've got the corner. I've got it. She made me say it twice. Then she made me write it down on the back of one of the photographs in my own hand, so that it would be in the house in something other than her memory. And I did, and my hand did not shake, which surprised me, because it had shaken on a map in that same valley 14 years before. I told her the part I had never told anyone, which was that I have replayed those 2 minutes 10,000 times, looking for the version where he lives, and there is no version where he lives, and the rest of us cross. He knew that. I think he knew that before I did. He spent his last 2 minutes on something larger than himself, and there is no medal that is big enough for that, and there is no silence long enough to honor it. And I had been trying to honor it with silence for 14 years, and I was so sorry, that it had taken me 14 years to come and sit at her table and say his name. She did not cry the way I expected. She reached across the table and she took my hand. This woman whose son I had been in command of when he died. And she held it, and she said the thing that finally let me set the valley down. He saved 23 people, she said. My boy, you carried him for 14 years so that nobody would forget that. I am grateful to you for that, more than I can say. But you have to listen to me now, Colonel, because I am his mother, and I have the right to tell you this. You are allowed to put him down. He is home. He has been home a long time. Set him down now. You are not leaving him. You are just finally coming home yourself. I have been told a great many things by a great many people who outranked me. I have never been given an order that I obeyed more completely than that one. I left her house at dusk. The light was going gold and long across that wild yard, and I stood on the porch for a moment before I went down the steps, and I felt for the first time in 14 years that I had walked out of the valley and that I had not left anyone behind by doing it. The drawer at home would open. The metal would come out into the light. The silence was over, not because anyone had ordered it over, but because a 19-year-old's mother had given me permission to come home, and it turned out that was the only permission I had ever actually needed. I drove the 4 hours back in the dark, and I thought about the auditorium, and the hand on my back, and the orders read aloud, and the name in the air, and the eagles, and the letter I would not answer, and the salute I would return exactly, and the woman at the kitchen table who had carried more than I had carried, and had still found, somewhere, the grace to set me free. And I thought about you, because by now I have learned that there is always a you. Someone listening to this who knows exactly what I'm talking about, who is carrying their own version of a valley, their own word that someone wrote about them once and that they came to believe. So let me say this to you directly, the way Lorna Quill said it to me, because some things have to be said plainly across a table. If you are still apologizing for a decision you would make again, this is for you. If you have made yourself small and careful and quiet because the world once trusted you with something terrible and it broke and you decided the safest thing was to never quite be trusted again, this is for you. Enduring a wrong without breaking is not the same as being whole. You can be right, finally and completely, in front of everyone, and still be carrying a weight you were never meant to carry alone. Composure is not healing. Survival is not the same as coming home. You are allowed to walk back into the room you earned. You are allowed to take the silver off the table and put it on your shoulders. You are allowed to say the name you have been keeping in a drawer, out loud, in front of people, and let them say it back to you. And you are allowed, you are more than allowed, you are asked by everyone who did not come home and would give anything to be in your place, to be glad that you are the one who did. Set it down. You are not leaving anyone behind. You are just finally coming home yourself.